Okay, so now we'll look at paying expenses. Alright, so we have two transactions here. The first transaction says that on January 31 we paid wages by cash. So simply the two accounts that are affected by this transaction are wages and cash. So we just head up our wages account and our cash account. And we know that wages is an expense account. Wages is an expense. And cash, of course, is an asset. Now we're paying wages by cash, right? So this transaction will cause the amount of cash we have to decrease. Cash is an asset. To decrease an asset, we credit. So we credit the cash account because it's decreasing. January 31. Wages 6,000. Wages now is an expense. When we pay our expense, we do not decrease our expense. Expenses cannot be decreased, right? The more expenses we have paid is the more expenses we pay is the more expenses we have paid. Expenses are not liabilities. All right. Remind me to explain to you the difference between an expense and a liability. Expenses are not liabilities, so you cannot reduce your expenses. The more expense you pay is the more you have paid. So expenses always increase. So to increase an expense, you debit. Always debit an expense account, except for when we eat out the stock. Paid the wages by cash, $6,000. And that's how you record the paid transaction 1. We move on to transaction 2, paid insurance by check. So the two accounts that are affected here are the insurance account and the bank account. Insurance we know is also an expense, so the double entry rule for expense applies, and bank, of course, is an asset. We're paying insurance by check, which means the amount of money in our bank account will go down. To decrease an asset, we credit. So we credit this. January 31, insurance, 1,500. And then remember that expenses are always debited, except when we eat out stock, which we'll talk about in the next lecture. All right, expenses are always debited because you can't reduce expense. And the double entry rule for expenses say to increase expenses, you debit. And the more insurance you pay is the more insurance you have paid. That's how you think about an expense. So you will debit the insurance account. So we see January 31, paid by check, so bank, 1,500. And that's how we record accounting transactions that deal with the paying of expenses. Toodles.